most important tool you can have in the kitchen is a knife and the knowledge of how to use it. The more comfortable you get around wielding one, the faster you'll be able to work in the kitchen. Building your knowledge. In this video, I'm going to walk you through some of the basic knives that are out there and take your time when cutting, use them, and eventually your time for when picking one out. Some might say, well, who cares what kind of knife that you use for, as long as it cuts, right? Well, yeah, that's what knives are meant to do. They're meant to cut things, but in theory, you can use whatever knife that you want to use for whatever, but it does help to have the right tool for the right job, and that way it will make things easier for you, have the job done faster, as well, most importantly, keep you safe. Looking at knife construction, there's 4 basic things that I'm going to talk about. It's useful information just so it can help you feel a little bit more comfortable around some of the knives that are in your kitchen. So I'm going to pick up a basic chef's knife. And the first thing that we're going to talk about is, of course, the blade. If you flip the knife on its side, you can see that the blade extends all the way into the handle. This part of the knife is actually called the tang. Just a little bit of trivia. You don't really actually need to know what it's called, but that is what it is. It's the tang. And in better constructed knives, the tang, or the blade's going to extend all the way through the handle. So as you can see, it is one solid piece of steel. Why is that important? It's going to help your knife be a little bit more balanced, have better stability and sturdiness when you cut. Let me find a knife that doesn't have a long tang. So if you're taking a look at this knife right here, you can see that the tang only goes about 3/4 of the way through. What does that mean? So this knife is, not as expensive. It is a little bit more cheaply made, and it's still fine to use. There's nothing wrong with it. It just might not last as long as some other knives, and it will affect the balance. So the next part of the knife that we're going to talk about is the bolster. The bolster is this little ridge right here that comes between the blade and the handle. Not all knives have these, so this particular one does. As you can see, there's a little protrusion here on the knife. There's a knife like this that doesn't really have a large bolster. The end of the blade just kind of goes straight into the handle. It comes down to personal preference whether or not you want a bolster on your knife. Be mindful of balance. This is kind of where the balancing point of the knife usually is. This one's a little bit off balance, and the blade's a little bit heavier than the handle, so it leans a little bit forward. I'm not a big fan of that. So the bolster does make it easier to hold the knife. It provides a little bit of protection for your fingers when you are holding the knife, so it doesn't just go straight into the heel of the blade. This is also the part of the knife where you're going to be looking for balance. So the way that I usually check for balance is I put the handle into my hand, and I just kind of let go of it and see if it falls or stays in my hand. So this particular knife is leaning a little bit forward. Not really a big fan of that. I like a knife that is balanced just because it will be taking you a little bit more effort to kind of maneuver around and figure out how you're going to be cutting with it. So one thing we want to be mindful of is balance, and the bolster is where we're going to be looking for that or testing for it. The way you test for balance in a knife is just put it in the palm of your hand and kind of let go of it and see if it falls forward or if it sinks right into your hand. And we don't want one or the other that is, it goes too far forward or it sinks too much in your hand, that like the blade is completely light. This particular knife, as we can see, if I start letting go of it, it does dip forward. The blade is very heavy. Whereas I have a different chef's knife where if I'm letting go of it, it stays pretty balanced, and that's generally the kind of knife I prefer using, just because it feels more of an extension of your arm, whereas you're constantly fighting something that is trying to either go away from you or towards yourself. You're looking for a balanced knife just because it will prevent your hand from getting tired quickly, it will prevent wrist strain, and it will help cut down on the amount of force that it will actually take you to cut things. Lastly, I'm going to talk about the handle of the knife. Not much to note here. The blade is usually fastened to the handle by rivets, which are what these dots here are. It just means that the knife has been fastened together all the way through. It's going to be very, very sturdy. The rivets should definitely be flush. They shouldn't be poking out. It should be completely smooth. If there are no rivets on the knife, usually they're fastened by glue. Let me see. So something like this doesn't have rivets. It's probably that the tang goes partially, if not all the way through, and then it's fastened by glue on the inside. And same thing with this knife right here. The tang does go all the way through, but as you can see, there are no rivets. It's also probably fastened by glue. So what you are looking for in a handle is making sure it's not too long or too short for your hand. We'll all have our own personal preferences on what kind of handle that you're looking for. It honestly comes down to whatever feels most comfortable to you. There really should be no strain when you're cutting. Never, never, ever should we be looking for strain when we're cutting. So we definitely want to make sure that we find a knife handle that fits best into your hand. So talking about straining when you're cutting, definitely don't want to do that. One other aspect that does affect it is how heavy your knife actually is. And they vary from super light to super heavy. And again, it's going to come down to personal preference on what feels good for you, what really works with your hand. However, you never really want to rely on the weight of the knife itself to do the work for you, just because, again, that's really the job of the blade. The blade should always be sharp, and that's what should be doing all the work when you're cutting. I'll be talking about sharpening and maintaining your knives in a separate video. Hopefully, once those are done, I'll link them down below.